Do you ever ask yourself, am I playing too small? Have I left it too late to start afresh? Will I come to the end of my life and feel that I somehow let myself down? This is your invitation to hear from some amazing people who have asked themselves those very same questions and chose to wake the F up, to get off the hamster wheel of mediocrity and seize the life that was calling them. Be inspired and be challenged to discover who you have the potential to become and the contribution you're here to make. And now, here to guide you on the most important quest of your life is your host, Janet Hogan.
If you're familiar with this podcast, you'll know that as part of every interview, I ask my guests to complete the Magic Triangle quiz to reveal their three core needs, the three things that would make the biggest positive difference to their life right now. I call it the Magic Triangle because a bit like Aladdin's lamp, where you rub it, the genie appears and grants you three wishes. Same thing with the Magic Triangle. Whatever you choose seems to have an uncanny way of coming about. 3 years ago, my next guest was one of the first people to ever put the Magic Triangle to the test. And as it turned out, one of the three things she wanted more of in her life was growth. Be careful, as they say, what you wish for. In the years since, she has been on a roller coaster of a growth journey that would have given Indiana Jones a run for his money, but not one to shy away from a challenge. She has handled the curveballs that life has thrown at her with her customary courage and never say die attitude. Today, she returns from her heroine's journey to tell us about the ups and downs she's had to navigate to end up where she is today as CEO of a dynamic and groundbreaking online marketing school that's carved out a very interesting niche for itself. Ella Cook, welcome to Wake the F Up.
Thanks, Jan.
So, how did you feel seeing your life summed up that way?
It's great. I love when I read that. I was like, oh my God, I love it. I couldn't have written that better myself. That's so much fun.
Well, I think if anyone has had a life that lives up to the title of this show, it's you. You seem to spend every moment of the last 3 years waking the F up. So take us back to that time you decided to climb on board the roller coaster. You were living in Australia on the verge of saying, I do, and settling down to married life in the burbs of Brisbane. What happened next?
Feels like a lifetime ago now. I do still have to pinch myself that it was 3 years ago. I can't believe how much can change in a year and how much growth someone can go through. I really, it was kind of a week to week thing. I think ultimately I woke up one day and realized that the life that had been building was not making me happy and wasn't going to be enough for me. I had a beautiful relationship with a wonderful man for 8 years. And actually one of the first things that really got me was at my engagement party when I realized that most of the people there, even though it was this stunning event and I'd done an amazing job, putting these beautiful things together, my best friend got flown up from Sydney, and she was the only one there apart from like two of my close friends that I wanted to hang out with. And I realized that I had created a life that looked great, but wasn't really something I was actively trying to participate in. And then it got to the stage of needing to make a decision whether I pursue this life that I now have of location independence and building my own business, or choose to stay with my partner. That was kind of where I got to, really, because we both decided that we were going to do this life, but at the 11th hour, some things changed for him. And I really had to make a decision if this was worth sacrificing the relationship in order for me to pursue what was coming next. And ultimately, even though I did really love him and really, it was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, and up until saying goodbye to my dad, it's still the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I actually had a vision one day, in and amongst a bit of kind of doubt and a lot of, I could see him going through a lot of challenge. I actually had a vision of me being like a 90-year-old woman, and she was saying, am I allowed to swear on this podcast, by the way? Am I allowed to swear? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, please. Yeah,
I was just checking if I have to say F or if I can say fuck.
No, you can say fuck. Yeah,
Okay, good stuff. Well, the 90-year-old version of me was looking back at my life, and it was kind of one of these out of body experiences. He was saying something to me, and I just kind of time slowed down, and it was almost like like you called it the miasma, like the fog just like lifted for a second, and I got to kind of see what was happening from a distance. And this 90-year-old woman was like, if you stay and you don't do this, you fucked this up. You're going to get to the end of your life. And I could see it, the kids, the grandkids, the white picket fence life. And it physically made me feel sick. And I just knew that if I didn't try to do this for myself and just see what was on the other side of this discomfort, that I would never forgive myself. And that was kind of the escape hatch that I needed, to then, and it was very easy for me to make the decision. Easy is not the right word, but it was very quick. I was very quick to make the decision after that, because I got a glimpse of almost like the fear of staying where I was greater than the pain of like potentially jumping into the unknown, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it's very instructional. And, that to me sounds like a real wake-up call. There's an interesting law of the wake-up call that, once you hear it and you don't do anything about it, it just gets louder and louder and louder. So who's to know what calamities would have presented themselves to you if you hadn't listened to it when you did,
Yeah, so, absolutely. I think I could feel those signs earlier as well. And there was a lot going on for me emotionally, but I think because of the sense of safety that relationship had created for me, it was kind of the only thing that was anchoring me, really. And it was just one of those things that I just never thought that I would leave. I just assumed that it was going to be there, and that it would all be okay. And it was really intense leaving that sense of safety behind, and having been, I've shared a bed with someone for 8 years, like someone's always been there for 8 years, and most of my entire 20s. I was 28 when I left him and when I moved over to Bali. So that was like, I was leaving everything I knew behind in that way. But that voice was just so strong. And I think that I was so curious to discover where that came from and what was driving that. I was like, I think there was also like a level of boredom of kind of like, oh, I see how this is going to play out. Like that doesn't feel exciting for me. I want the adventure road where I get to discover more and learn more about what's possible, not see the rest of my life laid out in front of me and be like, cool, let's just go do that, like color in, the lines. That doesn't feel like fun.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you're given such a stark choice. It really was a red pill, blue pill moment, wasn't it? And so you chose the one that was really calling you, and to take a quote from the hero's journey, you left the ordinary world and dived into the unknown. So what happened then?
A bit of a shit show. And actually someone, a mutual friend of ours, I was on the phone to after I'd gotten to Bali. It was interesting. Just before I kind of talk about like arriving in Bali, there was a period where after I'd made the decision to leave him, I still committed to coming out here, and we'd had a ticket booked together to come out to Bali, and we'd had this life out here that I now live designed together. So it really was him deciding not to do that, even though I was the person that ended up putting it into the relationship. It was very much a decision that we both wanted, I think, in terms of going our separate ways. But the weeks that followed were a bit of a blur, and I definitely felt like I didn't have a handle on my life at all. Like there was so much emotion going on for me that I was just waiting for the day that I boarded the plane, and I did everything and anything I could to distract myself from the present moment until I got there. And I was really scared as well initially of just how I would handle things on my own, because I'd had a tendency to turn to like the party lifestyle in order to cope with the emotions that I was feeling. And for 7 weeks, he was still in the country, and then he left and went back to Ireland. And after that 7 weeks, all hell broke loose in my life. Once he'd left the country, for some reason, I suddenly had permission. I think personally, I gave myself permission, or it just all got a bit much because I was on my own, maybe, I don't know, but everything went a bit mental in my life. And I did just start to sort of, the weekends blurred into the weekdays and everything got a bit crazy. And then Bali came after I spent a little bit of time with my family. And after I'd been here for a couple of months, I still hadn't found that ability to sit with myself. I got here, and Bali is one of those places where I think a lot of places in the world that have this type of high energy have both sides to them. They have like a very spiritual, deep, peaceful side to them, and they almost have like a hedonistic, hectic side to them as well. The other place that comes to mind is Ibiza, is very similar, kind of has the same vibe here as Bali. And I think that you can come here for either one of those experiences and anywhere on the spectrum in between. And I just took the vibes of where I was leaving Australia right here with me. And the mutual friend I was going to reference, I was talking to him one day, and he was just saying, he was like, so you've left your fiance, you've quit your job, you've sold all of your stuff, and you've packed up and you moved to a tropical island, and you're still miserable. I was like, yeah. He was like, well, maybe you forgot to leave yourself behind. And it was a bit of a wake-up call for me that maybe this wasn't even about my relationship. Maybe this wasn't about the work that I was leaving or anything. Maybe there was something that I was trying to escape from within myself. I was running away from something within myself. And the fact that I couldn't seem to sit still and couldn't seem to make good choices for myself. I was running a really up and down freelance business, and because of the partying, I was like missing deadlines, and I just nothing in my life was really had any real value in it, except for me being able to look good on Instagram, like, oh, look at me, I'm a digital nomad, I live in Bali, everything's like this way. And then I was just passing time between the next time I could go out and numb the pain. So needless to say, kind of to your point before of like, if you don't deal with the things, life has a way of waking you up. Well, I got bitten by a dog, I fell off my scooter, like there was a few things that happened, and I just kept going. And then one night I had a bit too much of a party and ended up in a what I've come to realize is probably kind of like a clinically induced or chemically induced depression, just from burning the candle too hard and not sleeping and replenishing, the chemicals in my brain. I ended up in a quite imbalanced state, and I came to you when I was in that state, Jan. I'm sure that you remember where I was. I was really, really depressed for a couple of weeks, and just really questioning everything, questioning my value here, questioning my sense of worth, and just felt completely useless. So I was kind of stuck in this place of, life had been on one trajectory in Australia where I'd been trying to fit the mold of what I thought I was supposed to do. And then I broke free from that and gave myself space to create whatever I wanted. Didn't know what the fuck I wanted. So I just was just going day to day, trying to not deal with that question or deal with the person that I would see when I got left with myself. I feel like you want to say something.
Yeah. And that's the scariest moment, isn't it? Because when you don't know who your true self is, you go, well, I know that was my fear. If I do any kind of deep work, what if I, A, don't like who I find, or B, there's no one home? There's actually, it's just like an empty shell. So would you describe that 2-week period where you were in that deep depression? Would that be like your ground zero point? Do you feel?
Oh, absolutely.
The dark night of the soul?
Absolutely. I was suicidal for 2 weeks. I really, I didn't want to be here. I just wanted there to be an off button. And every day I would wake up and go, fuck, what am I supposed to do today? Like, I had the strongest desire I've ever had to just disappear. Like, I wanted to go and find a little shack on the beach in the north of Bali, take a bunch of books and just try and figure out why I was here, like what the point of all of this was. And I was just in such a humbled place where I realized that I knew nothing, and I really didn't. I was worried that was all there is, and I was feeling so useless and so worthless that I didn't. And I think because of the imbalance that I was experiencing chemically as well, I was just caught in this loop downwards. But I also, I was like suicidal, but I didn't actually really. I think one of the things I found so stressful is I just knew I wouldn't do that. I couldn't do it to my family, to my mom. So So I think I was like, God damn it, I'm stuck here. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
What do
Yeah.
I do?
Bloody
What
limbo.
do I do?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so what happened? What was the process after that? How did you get out of that dark place?
Well, there was a couple of things. I mean, I'm really grateful and very lucky to have had quite a few angels in my life at that time. And you were absolutely one of them. One of them's my now business partner, and the other one's my now housemate, both of which I was living with at the time. But actually, I came to see you after I saw my business partner on the beach, and I'd been sat on the beach, chain smoking cigarettes, sunburnt, looking at the ocean going, why strap concrete blocks? Like, that was where I was at that time. And I was just like, did not know what I was going to do with myself. And he just happened to walk past me with his surfboard, and he was like, like, are you okay? And I was like, no. And we just
Really?
briefly chatted. It turned into like an hour. And then he was like, it sounds like you need to like get some help, so have a chat with somebody, because he just couldn't offer me emotional support, but was very caring. And I was like, you know what, there is someone in my life I could go and see. There's this woman called Janet that is a client of mine and a beautiful coach, and I know that she could probably help. And I gave you a call, and then I came to see you after that. And I think sitting with you was, and you and Ralph were just such wonderful sense of safety for me, and just feeling like I could really let go of that need to have it all together, because I really didn't. And I was, just felt really, really safe. And you and I had some really interesting chats about what did make me happy, and what was going to give me some life. And I think because I was feeling so numb, some of those conversations really, really sparked something in me. And I actually particularly remember laughing because you were like, what makes you happy, Ella? Like, let's make a list. And I was like, the sunset. And you were like, good, more. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, and then I was like, well, actually, I'm really happy when I'm dancing. Like, I really love dancing. And you were like, oh, amazing. And I was like, I don't understand how this is helpful. But, it's interesting because I remember there was a moment when I was running my women's circles and you were attending one of them, and you looked over to me, and we were just laughing at the fact that there was a point in time just a few years earlier when you were like, oh, that dancing thing that you said that you love, like, this is what we've been doing for the last few hours. And it was quite surreal that that those things that we kind of talked about then, connection with others, being of service, dancing and sunsets are just some of the things that I cherish more than anything now. And I know that pursuing those things makes me happy. I think one of the biggest catalysts, though, was actually Scott, my business partner, suggested that I do the Colby Test. And it's an MO, like your modus operandi of like how you show up in the world and kind of operate in a few different ways. And I think it was the first thing that shifted me out of just self-loathing and more into curiosity, because it was just this one thing that the last column on there is kind of helps you to differentiate where you sit on the spectrum of creating something from scratch using your total imagination and building new systems, and taking existing systems and fixing them. And I've never really leaned towards either of one specifically. I've always kind of been really good at doing both. And actually that's, that's what I was doing. But I've always seen that up until that point, I'd always seen that as a weakness, because I was like, well, I don't seem to be able to do this really well or this really well. I kind of do both. And when I did the Colby test, I scored in the middle, which was what they call the restore mode. And it's actually a really unique superpower is what they were kind of pitching it as. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, what if I've been looking at my skill set all wrong? What if I've been measuring myself up against the wrong things? And what if there is something unique about the way that I show up in the world that could be valuable? And that just set me on a whole fact-finding mission of what is innately valuable about me, apart from the fact that I'm just, intrinsically valuable as a human, which I didn't truly believe at that stage. And then I went on a couple of retreats, and I went to A-Fest, the Mind Valley conference, and I had nothing. I'd quit my freelance business. I had nothing to my name other than just my energy and who I was. And so I kind of went around with a notepad and all these experiences and was like, what feedback am I getting from people, and what is making me feel good? And, storytelling, sharing vulnerably, like sharing openly and vulnerably was one of the things that I was getting a lot of feedback was really valuable for people. My radiance and happiness and energy and just ability to find joy in like simple things was seemed to be what people were really, really enjoying about me. And I was really great at creating connection as well. And I just literally went down on a a bit of a path of just those things. And then off the back of that, I ended up having like the after party for A-Fest at my house. I had like 150 people there, and it was just this thing that snowballed, and I just ran with it. And then after that, there was so many women that I didn't realize lived in Canggu and here in Bali, and I just got on with them so well. I was like, hey, why don't we catch up once a week at my house? We'll do some yoga, like have some wine, just chill out, which ended up turning into me running these women's circles. It was completely organic and not something that I had intended to do, but they loved the first one. And then there was more and more and more. And this turned into, I mean, you were kind enough to let me use the villa that you're, filming this from now, in the jungle in Bali, for me to host, 16 to 20 women sometimes. Once a week it was at one stage, 4 hours of me just doing weird Ella shit that they loved. So it was interesting how that just self-inquiry and not really having an agenda of like how I'm supposed to be, but just flowing with what was feeling really good and how I seemed to be able to be of value to people, that really shifted things for me massively and really changed my life. And there is one retreat that I went on in Thailand when I took some time away. I needed to go on a visa run, that I experienced like breath work for the first time there, meditation for the first time. I really dived into a lot of very spiritual practices, and I had some really crazy visions on that retreat.
Was that like holotropic breath work? So it was a little bit like a psychedelic experience?
Exactly. Absolutely. Exactly. And I had some very strong visions, and I saw visions of me in the future. I saw this energy. I feel it in my body when I say it, because it was just, it was trippy. And like, I'd taken a lot of, LSD and experimented with a lot of drugs when I was younger. And it freaked me out a bit that I was having these hallucinations and these visions without anything other than my breath. And it was one of the first things that anchored me to what I now value most, which we'll talk about in my triangle, I'm sure, but this idea of transcendence. And it made me realize that I had no idea how this world operated, and that the black and white way that I'd been looking at things maybe was just total shit. And that really excited me, because it kind of took me back to like when I was a child and I would read like adventure books, or I would make up stories, and I was like, maybe this is all a playground. Maybe this doesn't have to be anyway. Maybe I get to just explore and discover. And it was, and I'd been really disconnected from my femininity and my body in general up until that point. And on that retreat, I got to, dance with fire and really play. And I made friends with a lot of the people that hosted the retreat, and kind of got to play behind the scenes, and just saw the way that other women were with themselves, and really envied that when I saw them, the way that they were comfortable with their bodies and with their femininity and with their sexuality. And at the time I knew I was miles away from that, but it was very inspiring in just sort of showing me that, again, it came down to that thing of growth. I realized how excited I was about growing, and that was just such a drive for me, that it gave me the motivation and the inspiration that I needed to get that forward momentum, which is, I think, that one of the only things that can really pull people out of depression long term, is that idea of like, I've got something to wake up for tomorrow. And I had that. Just exploration. That was all that it was for me, but it was so enough for me to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, well, as they say, the energy to move an immobile object, something that's at rest, is so great compared to moving when you're traveling with momentum. So once you've jumped on that train, basically, you don't want to get off. You want to keep that momentum going, which it sounds like that you did. I'm interested to know, how is the experience different when you said you took LSD back in the day more as a party drug, with coming, I guess, from the party space, so not so much about self-exploration. How was that experience different from the one that you experienced in Thailand?
How was my recreational use different?
Did you have any of those same kind of, life-changing insights?
I think that my use of I've always been very drawn to psychedelics. Like I had a lot of experiences when I was a teen, and I think that the reason I've always been drawn to them is the same reason that I was obsessed with adventure books and just creativity when I was younger, because I think I've always known and I've always felt connected to something other, and I wanted to experience it. And when I especially LSD, I mean, it always felt like to me that the veil was lifted, and I got an opportunity to see what was really here, and there was no rules, and it was just playtime, and it was so much fun. But obviously, and I've always, my friends would always say to me, like, you're always very with it. I always seemed to be able to hold space for others, handle the situations if shit got a bit out of control. I never had a bad trip. I just always was having the best time ever. And I was very inspired, to paint and things like that. But the messages that I got, I didn't know were messages. I didn't know what I was doing. It was very unconscious use of it. But I knew that for 4 or 5 days after a long trip, that my world was magical. The sky was a brighter color, and things became more possible. And I had some of the most creative experiences of my life when I was younger. I mean, as I'm saying these words to you, like all this stuff comes flooding back of just some of the most profound things, but I always had an edge of paranoia to everything I was experiencing, because I didn't feel safe ultimately. I mean, my first ever LSD experience, my drink was spiked. So the guy that I was seeing at the time when I was 17 put it in my coffee, and I said to him, I was like, is it normal that the walls are melting? And he was like, you're in for a ride. And so obviously that being my first experience was, that kind of set the scene of just like, I kind of was rolling with it. I know it's not okay. It's what transpired afterwards in that relationship also turned out to not be okay. There was definitely like a lack of sense of safety. And I think what actually ended up happening was that I very much learned how to compartmentalize during those experiences. So I think I shut off my access to my emotion and my body, and I would very much have a very mental trip. That would be the kind of experiences that I had. And then when I was in Thailand and when I was experiencing this breath work, it was actually toning and breath works. And I've noticed that for me, when sometimes I need to make noise, just like whatever it is. And when I was in Ibiza on a retreat, I had a very similar out of body experience where I used the sound and vibration to access. It like shakes me awake, and it kind of moves something within me. And we'd done all this breath work and we'd done this toning, and I think that was the first time I'd had like let me call it like a vision or a hallucination that was both felt in my body and coming from my mind. And that's what felt intense about it, because I was like, this has come from within me. This isn't something that I've, ingested and it's projecting on the wall, because it was like, like I can see, a 1960s race car poster in the fingerprints on the window, like that. But I was like, oh, that's so clever that my mind or my eyes can make that happen. But the visions that I saw in Thailand I could feel were coming from within me, from this source, from this energy that I didn't have access to. And I've actually I'm such an advocate of psychedelics and the intentional use of them. And my journey with them since has been much more psilocybin. I haven't really played around with LSD since I was a teen, really, or had an experience here. It just was a bit intense for me. Mushrooms and psilocybin seems to be much more organic feeling for me, and I get a much more embodied experience. And through the intentional use of those very high doses as well, and very, very different space, very safe, very intentional, a lot of, create intentional music. I have been able to access some places within me in terms of healing and also creativity. And I really think, like, especially the earlier 6 months of this year, I think a lot of the work that I did around healing, a lot of the trauma that I experienced when I was younger was possible because of the use of psychedelics. They helped me to access something within me that I didn't have access to in talk therapy. And I think one of the things that trauma can do so well is just shut us off from our bodies. And I think some of the trauma that I experienced when I was 17, specifically, sexual abuse and emotional abuse, had just disconnected me from that. And the high doses of psilocybin combined with, a very safe space gave me access to release some of that pain and that trauma.
It's so interesting because, of course, a lot of the conversation being had around psilocybin at the moment is to help people who have, very serious long-term depression, for example. And so, and they probably are, the first round that really need these treatments. But you can see it won't be before long that it becomes more normalized, and that basically we all need to know who we are. We all need to understand. We all need to fall back in love with ourselves, basically, and with life. And so if there's a way to do it that's actually takes us back to nature, because we've been so disconnected from nature, then, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like what you've been doing is almost like you had to reach a an area of, you know, the bottom of the abyss, and you've been slowly climbing a staircase out of it using all the various tools, but each experience kind of building on the previous one in a constructive way. Yeah.
It was also an interesting in-between stage as well, though, where I started on the exploration journey kind of earlier on when I was telling you about starting those circles and things like that. And it, I was still very ego driven then. You know, there was still a lot of me feeling like I needed to prove myself. I was very angry with my mother at that time. And, you know, I had a lot of it's almost like I've been like the grumpy teen had been let out of her room, you know, and she was stomping around all over the place and like giving everyone shit for all of the pain that she was feeling. And I, you know, I built my marketing agency, and I was very, what I would probably just describe as I had a lot of very aggressive energy about me then, you know, and I wasn't living with the integrity that I wanted to. And there was still a gap between what I was feeling inside, which was completely vulnerable and fragile, and what I was presenting to the world, which was like, don't fuck with me because I'll fucking hurt you. That was like, even though anyone that really knew me knew that I was, you know, a big ball of love. There was definitely these spikes that were being presented to the outside world.
So, and here you're really talking about, you know, unresolved childhood wound and the, you know, the shadow that gets amplified around that. So what was the next part of the journey before you got to where you're at now? You know, how did you resolve that? How did you work on that? And how intentional was it, or was it haphazard?
It was very intentional in that I'd reached a stage with this business that I run now. It was actually through the container of leadership and entrepreneurship, and actually also partnership with my business partner, because even though we're not, you know, life romantic partners, we're in a marriage of sorts, right? And we've made a commitment to each other, and we are very, very different people, and we have a very different way of showing up in the world as well, very different communication styles. Like, we're very, very different. And so we've made, and also I tend towards an anxious attachment style, and he would tend towards an avoidant attachment style, which is, you know, match made in hell in a relationship. So it was like, yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And just constant points of friction. And I think also, you know, I was in the way that the business is built, like, you know, I was the front person for sales, and I was having very, you know, my business really was the container where I'd reached a stage in my life where I was able to create time freedom for myself and really good financial income. And I took myself off to like just talking about this now, I'm actually realizing that it was my pursuit of relationship and of love that really made this next shift for me, because I flew myself to the Netherlands middle of 2020 to meet a guy that I've been talking to on the internet. And that was a complete disaster in terms of like the expectation that I'd had versus what actually ended up playing out. And it didn't work out between us. And what ended up happening after that was I moved to Mallorca and kind of hid in a house there, if I'm honest, like licking my wounds and eating everything I could in the fridge. And I realized that because I didn't drink. I was on a very healthy, quote unquote, diet of like this from working with my nutritionist. All those distractions that I'd had before, I gently weaned out of my life over the last couple of years. And I'd, you know, kind of got this sense of, oh, I've got my shit together. But I noticed that when I dealt with this big emotional experience in the Netherlands and when I went to Mallorca, I didn't have my shit together. And all I wanted to do was eat. And it was like this issue that had been there for so long was finally in the spotlight, and I couldn't hide from it. And I realized that I was hiding from the world, and I put on weight, and I was, you know, crushing it in my business in the daytime behind Zoom. And then I'd close the laptop and I'd just sit in the house and eat for the rest of the day. And I was like, maybe something's wrong. maybe this is exactly what I need to deal with. You know, like I'd been dealing with all this other stuff, and it was like, okay, you're still not okay just being, and I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but I was like, okay, this behavior is not working. I actually caught myself mid-cheese standing in the fridge one day, realizing that while I was overeating the food, I was fantasizing about how I was not going to eat the next day so that I wouldn't gain the weight. And I kind of had another one of those out of body moments where I was like, this strategy might not be working, Ella. Like it might be time to shake things up a bit, because we all know, all of us in this room here know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's been the same fucking thing that's happening right now. It was really painful. You know, it was painful. I fell to my knees. I burst into tears, and I was like, enough. Whatever I'm doing, I'm sick of hurting myself this way. And then I ended up, I hired an eating disorder coach that works with, you know, overachieving, ambitious women like myself.
I'm never enough. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. And so that prompted deep inquiry into the why no stillness, why can't I sit with myself. And you know, it was off the back of this quote unquote failed relationship with this man, right, of like, I'm not enough. And he'd rejected me, actually, like, I'll just be frank with you, in my mind, because of my body, because I didn't look a certain way, even though I'm like, you know, a normal weight and beautiful and all the things. I had not been enough for him. And that, well, I've actually been too much for him. And turned out the relationship with food can usually relate to the way that you treat yourself, and the beliefs that you have about yourself. And my belief is that nothing is ever enough, and I'm too much. So if you translate that into food, that's overeating and eating when I'm not hungry, right? So that's what I ended up experiencing. But the transition happened when I developed self-compassion, and the way that I, like, as in the transition into, okay, actually maybe I really need to heal what's here out of an act of self-love, not out of an act of like, well, I need to achieve something in the world. That a few weeks later, when I started working with this coach, she just said to me, she very gently kind of eased me into the process. She was like, the next time you find yourself at the fridge, just ask yourself, what are you feeling? Just sit down and have that conversation. Just create a gap and a pause between. And I did that. I compulsively went to the fridge, but I was like, okay, just sit down. What are you feeling? And I felt this like rumble inside of me. And I was like, what's that? That's interesting. So I went and sat on my yoga mat and just sat there and was like, what are you feeling? What are you feeling? And the rumbling kind of turned into like a really big rumble, which turned into an overwhelming sense of sadness. And then I started to cry. And then that crying turned into like very like sobbing, which turned into wailing. And then I was almost nearly vomiting. I felt so overwhelmed with emotion that it was like a tap, you know, like the tap had been backed up for so long, and this volcano exploded. And I just let it roll. I just let it do its thing. And I once it had finished, I kind of gathered myself and just still had my eyes closed and sat there. And I was overcome with this wave of what I realized was self-compassion. I was kind of like, holy shit, no wonder you've been eating all the cheese, Ella. The thing that's been sitting right under the surface before you do that is what just came out. Like, it makes total sense that you've developed this strategy to numb that out, because that was terrifying for you. And does that make sense? Like, I kind of was like, oh, wow, maybe I'm not eating because I'm broken or a bad person. Maybe this is a really amazing, beautiful strategy that my brain and body is designed to try and stop itself from feeling this thing.
Definitely. And it's really interesting because it's all focused on the stomach. And when you think about it, the stomach is your receptacle for feeling, particularly feeling negative emotion. We call them negative. This is probably not the right way to describe them, but emotions that we've been taught are bad, but they're not really. And that, you know, feelings of fear and anxiety tend to reside in the stomach. So I suppose, you know, eating could be a subconscious way of quelling that, you know, stopping it rising. But what's interesting is when you pause, didn't take anything off the shelf in the fridge and instead sat down with the feelings, the feelings were given space that they didn't have before to rise from within your stomach. And I think that once you do that, when you can open your stomach, the larder that is your stomach, open the pantry of emotions in there, that the next step is to the heart, you know. So from that point, you're able to open your heart up. But it's almost like the stomach is the guardian or the protector of the heart, and it protects us through fear. You know, it says, no, you can't go there. But what you did was basically you resolved your stomach issues.
Well, I just want to,
compassion.
I don't know if you'll be able to see, can you see this on the video here? I have this scar. So I was born with my stomach disconnected from where it was supposed to be. And I had surgery when I was 2. And it's funny because if I actually trace back like I had such a horrendous experience landing in Amsterdam and then feeling rejected by this guy. And it really threw me into a lot of self-hatred. And I had a beautiful coach at the time. And it was the inquiry of, I started getting obsessed, and I always have been, but I'm like, did this have an effect on me? You know, I had surgery when I was two, like life-saving surgery. And the first 2 years of my life was so traumatic because my mom I was just screaming all the time. Whenever I lay down, my stomach would like fold in half and I couldn't breathe. Every time she fed me, I would throw up, like you can imagine. And she was a single parent. My dad left when she was 3 months pregnant. And I just had such a traumatic, stressful childhood. And I can only imagine how stressed my mother was. But because my mom is one of the most resilient women I know, and has never made me feel like that was something that happened to me. It's just, you know, you're lucky to be alive. Let's make the most of it, is what my mom, that's her mentality. And so I've never really, and I'm grateful for that, really, really grateful for that, because it's given me that resilience and that courage to be like, whatever life throws at you, just fucking make it work. And kind of going, it was actually Tim Ferriss talking about his own healing journey with psychedelics, genuinely, that prompted me, because he didn't realize that he'd had experienced sexual abuse as a child, and he had a psychedelic journey that showed him those visions. And I was just so curious if there was something that I wasn't having access to that was following me around every day, this black cloud that I was feeling like I was sitting in this dirty fishbowl that I just felt like I was swimming around in. I wondered what that was, and that actually prompted a lot of the self-inquiry. And I realized, because I called my mom one day and I was asking her about this relationship I'd had when I was 17, and where I was, you know, there was a lot of physical, sexual abuse. And I said to her, well, I'm so glad that I had the courage to leave. And I told her the story of me leaving. And she was like, Ella, that's not what happened. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, that's not how it went down. And then she told me about when I called her from the hospital and said, like, Mom, I think, and she was telling me, I started having these memories come back, almost these little flashes. And I realized that maybe I'd had some PTSD around, you know, maybe I'd blocked these, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, there's something to be explored here. And it was those little breadcrumbs, I think, that just kind of pushed me. It just like all shuffled really quickly, like within a few months of just like me getting to this place. And after working with this eating disorder therapist, the PTSD came up a lot actually after that, because I was realizing that when I was creating these spaces, a lot of stuff was coming up and I was unable to handle the emotions that were coming up. And I actually called my mom one day and just told her how much I was struggling with it. And she was like, do you think it's time that you see a therapist? And I was like, yeah, like however many years later, maybe, you know, at 31 or 32, whatever it was, maybe I should see a therapist about this now. This is when I was 17. And I did. I started working with a trauma therapist, and then in the States, and he was incredible, very psychedelic friendly, right? So I could talk to him about my use of that. And I also hired a love and relationship coach, because I'd realized after this relationship with this guy in the Netherlands that didn't work out, when I moved to Mallorca, I found myself dating this guy that was like the carbon copy of my ex-fiance. Like Janet, it was like crazy for me. Like same job. He was an engineer come designer, like turned designer, same skin tone, same eyes. It was freaking me out. How I was like, there's a pattern on repeat here, and I'm not in the driver's seat. And that kind of freaked me out. So it was that really pushed me to work with her. And I think just the combination of having that really intensive therapy and being in the container of still running my business every day, still coaching and leading other people, and needing to learn how to be vulnerable in that space. I had to, when you're on, you know, let's call them sales calls, but, you know, discovery enrollment calls with people into the coaching world, you get shown all of the areas that you're unresolved within yourself, although, you know, everyone's such a mirror. And I was going through such deep work, and then having these conversations with people, I felt like I was in a fucking blender every day, and it was so intense. And then, but I just knew I just had this deep, and there was a few times throughout that I went back down to that place that I'd been at, you know, that I talked about before, that kind of ground zero. There were a few times within that. But I every time I did my spiritual practice, which was meditation, and I have these animal spirit cards that I connect with, and animals, nature has been something that brings me back. I say that as a bee flies past, which is brilliant, because the bee is a thing for me. Anyways, these animals and their meanings, and I guess I felt really guided You know, I'd come to a place when I was in Mallorca and I decided to go at this eating disorder issue. I started to have a really spiritual awakening. Like I started to feel that connection in Thailand again, you know, come back where I felt that something from within me, because I was connecting with my body again. And I was coming, you called it when we talked about this, coming home. And I could feel that, and it was bringing this connection to me. So I think that through those 6 months of, let's just call it hell, because it's what it felt like, I knew that I would pop out the inside. And everybody that I'd spoken to about their own dark nights of the soul knew they had. And I was like, this can't go on forever. So let's ride this until we feel different. And I did one day.
Well, you know, we need to have conversations like this because, you know, a lot of people haven't heard that expression, dark night of the soul. They don't know that this is part of our journey as a human species. All of this has been kept away from us for how many hundreds of years. And so we're now piecing it back together. It's like an old mosaic that we've discovered in a lost cave. And now we're getting the pieces and trying to make sense of it all. With a sense also that this was information that was readily available to previous, you know, generations, ancestors. We're learning it anew. So I'd like to talk to you. I want to get on to what you're doing now. We want to talk about that, but actually let's do that now, and then we'll have a look at your magic triangle. So, because that'll help put it in a bit of a context. So just let's fast forward to where you're at now, Ella, and tell us about the work that you're doing. How are you putting yourself out into the world?
Well, it's interesting because all of this that I've talked about was all led from a place of really just wanting to be of value and of service, you know, and I've noticed that the more work I did on myself and the more grounded and centered that I became, and honestly, the more fucking self-expressed I became, the more real I was, and the more that I was showing up doing the things that I loved and unapologetically so, everything in my world started to flow more, and business was better, and I was attracting beautiful people to join the program, and I've noticed that everything just felt more in alignment, and I was becoming a better coach, because you can help others more when you've, you know, worked on yourself, and you can only meet others as deeply as you've met yourself too. And, you know, the business that I run, School of Magic, we work exclusively with wellness practitioners, transformational coaches. So these are people that have done a lot of work on themselves. And I tend to attract people that are much older than me as well. And I don't really have that many people sort of in their early 30s in the program. Most people are older than that. And so I'm meeting and having conversations with these, like, you know, beautifully wise, mature people, and that kind of forces you to like work on your shit, right? Because I can support them, but I wanted to be able to emotionally support them, because I needed to be able to emotionally support myself. And it's so interesting because I think there was a way that I thought I needed to show up in my business, that I thought I needed to run sales calls, that I thought I needed to coach, that I thought I needed to market, that I thought I needed to be as a business partner. And I really just, over those first 6 months of the year, just really detached from that. And what it allowed me to do is just do more of the things that I loved and that were fun for me. And I started running the calls the way that I wanted to, coaching the way that I wanted to, running sales calls the way that I wanted to, and just really being much more authentic in what I was doing. And as soon as I started to do that, our business changed hugely. The vibe changed hugely. Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I think because I think one of the beautiful things about self-expression, and when you meet people that are much more self-expressed, it gives you permission to do the same. And what I think is one of the most untapped secrets of powerful marketing is authenticity. It's, you know, yes, there's strategies, and yes, there's things that, you know, will help people make decisions, and, you know, things that you need to include and checklists and all the rest of it. But really just having real conversations with people about real problems makes more of a difference than anything.
Yeah. And how important is it that you have real experiences to draw on? You know, we're making a real shift from feeling we have to acquire the information from the gurus out there who we tend to look up to go, no, you know, everything I know really comes from my learned experience, you know, like you've shared with us, you know, what you've relayed back is almost like a compendium of all the ways you can be tested, you know, all the different.
Really. And it's actually so interesting because, you know, your pain is your purpose, your mess is your message. And everything that I've been through in my life, and I've, just touched on a couple of things that I've experienced in my life so far. And I lost my dad a couple of years ago, and that experience of grief, just the compendium, as you call it, it's made me such a good marketer, because I've got this empathy. Like, I think the secret is being able to like really make people feel heard, right? Like, and you do that by authentically talking about the problem, not the surface level issues, but the real fundamental way that people feel when they experience these things. And I think that I'm helping. What we do in the business is we help these wellness practitioners, these coaches, develop their own marketing, and they're doing it for transformational offers where they're helping people heal from anxiety, eating disorders, grief, trauma. And I've been through all that shit,
You've
man.
been through it. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I can
you
really
know the
help
problem.
them. I know the problem. And even if I don't, we've got some people that have they help families and children and things like that. But this empathy that I have, and I think that we all have, but this container is really just helping the wellness practitioners to translate that. And because I'm not afraid anymore of helping them to share their real medicine, their real magic as well, because I'm doing that myself. I got a message from one of our students yesterday, and she's the number of times I hear, "Thank you for giving me permission. Thank you for giving me permission." And I love this, because this has nothing to do with me. I'm just a tool. I'm just a vehicle. I'm just the key, to help them unlock something that's already within them. Because I do really believe that we all have something unique to offer the world, and we're all able to serve in a unique way. And I think what I love working with people most on is just helping them to get rid of the limiting beliefs that help them, the same things that I had when I was like rock bottom of I'm not useful, I can't help anybody, and help them to tap into what they can do and what is valuable, and then give them strategies to be able to actually reach the right people and have resonance with the right people. And it is, it's just, it doesn't feel like work to me, Janet. It's like, it feels like magic. It's why we've named our business that way, because it's just alchemy. It's this incredible process.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Incredible process.
Let's speak to that alchemy, because that kind of has come up in a way in your magic triangle. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go for it.
So if you're listening to this for the first time, the idea is you isolate your three core needs, and needs are really interesting. So I define a need as something that, if it could be fulfilled, it would make the biggest difference, the biggest positive difference to your life. And what we're implying there is that it was at one point in your life, it was there, fully fulfilled, and it's the lack of it that creates the pain, and that's the pull towards it. And that's why it's significant, because it's part of your true self. It's just that for some reason, it feels like part of it's out there and part of it's in, and you want to bring it all fully in. So it's interesting being able to distill that down to the top three to get a lot of clarity about, where your energy needs to focus on right now, like a bit like a roadmap. So going through your three core needs. So the one, imagining a triangle, the one on the bottom left is community, bottom right, self-expression. And then if you like, the cherry on the top is transcendence. So that's the number one core need. And to understand what this really means, Ella, could you just starting with community, tell me, just saying like a paragraph of words, what community actually means for you? Why did that make that as one of your top three?
I feel safe, whole, loved when I have people that I feel that way about around me. And it also, for me, it also tied into the contribution piece, which wasn't, I didn't actually choose to have a standalone thing. When I think about community, I think about this two-way relationship where I build it and I add value to it, and then they love me in return. They love me, they keep me safe, they give me inspiration. It feels like this little bubble or blanket of tribe, of family around me. And I know that I thrive in that environment where I have people to contribute to, and people that can contribute to me, and people I can depend on that can depend on me. That relationship, that's what community really means for me. Yeah,
that's interesting. A picture of a womb with 5 quintuplets in it came up for me.
Perfect. I felt the same.
Yeah, so excellent. Thank you. Got a great picture of that one. Now, moving along the base of the triangle, tell us about self-expression.
Yeah, this one was it was interesting that this didn't make the top one for me, but I realized, I have to say thank you so much for this exercise, because the first time I did it, I landed at, I think, growth, contribution, and connection, maybe. Can't remember what
difference.
making
I think it was making
sense of
difference.
purpose, sense of purpose.
Sense of purpose, right?
That's what it was. And that felt fine. But I had a very visceral response to me doing this triangle, because I was like, fuck, I know what I want. I know what I need. God, that feels good. It felt so good to know what my number one need in life is, and the other things in my life that I need to make me happy. That felt so good. That was such a reaffirming of all the work that I have done. And so self-expression for me, I need it in my life, because there's so much that I cannot say, in a sentence. And for me, the self-expression piece comes as like, I need, if you can hear, like, I need it. I need to be able to get out whatever's in there in whatever fucking way I want to. And it needs to be unfiltered, and it needs to be real and raw and energetic and passionate and vibrant, and it needs to do something. It needs to move something, to shake something. One of the things that we identified when we worked together early on was my core limiting belief was that I'm trouble. And that comes from this idea of like, I wasn't brought here to keep things harmonious and status quo-y. I was brought here to shake shit up. And my self-expression does that. It does that. It moves things. It creates disorder, and which I just think is so beautiful now. I used to see that. It used to come out in negative ways and harmful ways, and now it's just vibrant and just colorful. And I noticed that if I don't self-express, if I don't allow myself to be big and bright and crazy and wild and all the things, it's just almost like the lid gets put on the jar, and then the jar starts to shake, and then the light goes out. It's I'm trying to create a visual for you, but it's like, it's hard for me to explain. Like, I need to have this constant outlet so that the fire can keep burning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I'm thinking back to when you were very young with that operation, and I am trouble. It could have even been on too much trouble, too much trouble to be picked up and nursed and all of those things. And that's when, crying, expressing equates to, I'm making mummy tired. Your mummy's too busy, and so we bottle ourselves up, and, we put a stopper on ourselves. And
I mean, as you're saying that, I'm feeling that in my body, because there's definitely I love my mother, and if she ends up listening to this, Mom, I love you, and none of this is a go at you. I think you did the best that you could. Just want to say that, because I'm very grateful for the relationship that we now have. It was never really like if I ever went to express emotion, it was and it literally was, the lid was put on it. And I think that maybe one of the reasons that I get so much from toning and from making loud noises is that I'm just able to unfiltered let it go. And one of the experiences I shared with you when I had a psilocybin journey was I screamed for like an hour, not from my throat, but from my stomach and from my chest. And just this unfiltered noise that got as loud as it possibly could for as long as it could was one of the most healing experiences I've had. Just being able to make to express and not be worried about how people are going to respond to that, and if it's okay or if it measures up against someone else's standards. And I think one of the reasons that I've gravitated so much towards dance recently, not that I didn't as a kid, it was my number one thing that I loved to do as a kid. Turns out it's still the number one thing I love, is that there's kind of no right or wrong way to do it. So I get to self-express there in a way that feels good and fun for me. And I think it's even come so much more. Like, I mean, my hair is pretty wild today, and it's been in braids all week. And I'm looking at ways that I can use my clothing. You can see the paintings behind me. Like, I really am always trying to do something that's expressing. So I know that even that, having this conversation with you today, this is a form of self-expression for me, and this gives me energy and gives me life.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Ella. Let's move to Transcendence now. The cream that's floated to the top. I'd love to hear how you define that.
Well, I had to Google it because I got to the end of the triangle, And I was like, had to keep going back because I was like, no, it's not quite right. It's not quite right. And I think that because the words are in alphabetical order, I kind of picked a few things, but I was like, what is it, that thing that I need more than anything? And I, through this journey with the food and the eating, I've arrived at a place where I've been through a few little whiplash experiences of this, like a few months ago. I go up to Bali Silent Retreat and take some time out for myself now. And I know that regardless of anything else that I could do in my life to make myself feel better, when I feel connected with myself, which for me actually makes me feel connected with source, with the universe, with whatever you want to call it, with that and the flow of energy that whatever, I don't even know what it is. But the sense of something beyond me, beyond this body, beyond this mind, beyond this identity, beyond this world, that sense of connectedness to everything is enough for me when I feel that. And I only need to feel that for a few moments in the morning every day. And I can't imagine what I would experience on, a 21-day Vipassana now. Jesus Christ, lose my mind. I literally lose my mind. I'd like just be somewhere else. I should do that. But that's the reason that's so important for me is that everything else seems to flow when, and I think it comes from a place of being able to fill up my cup in the morning of enoughness. Of I feel that sense of connection to something else that I can't explain, that's not tangible or here. And it's bliss, it fills me with this emotion of joy, the top of the scale, of the list of emotions, the number one at the top. I feel that in my body, and I always smile and shed a joyful tear every day. And I can't believe that it's that simple. I can't believe that idea that I don't matter, that not in that way, but like that it. Yeah. It's hard for me to explain. I think you understand what I'm trying to share.
Yeah, it's like you're everything and nothing all at the same time, and that you're fully present with yourself, but at the same time, you're aware of something that's so vast, you'd be smaller than a grain of sand in the universe, and it's a comforting feeling in both senses of just being part of something so much bigger than we can possibly comprehend. Is that right?
And absolutely. That's perfectly said. And I think the thing that I love as well is that it sparks in me because I think the ego that I've dealt with, she loves, I call it Eleanor. She loves to be the fucking center of attention and the biggest thing that's the problem in the world and the biggest thing that's going to be the solution too. And it doesn't make me feel good. It puts all this pressure on me to be a certain way and do a certain thing. And when I experience transcendence, Eleanor does not matter. Like, she just does not even feature. And suddenly my insignificance brings me joy, because I'm unable to explain what I'm experiencing, which reminds me that I don't know at all what's going on. And what I find so incredible is that when I experience that space, it's like my body responds in a way where it's like, yes, correct. Everything comes online, and I love that, because I'm like, wait a minute, what is that? That's really cool. And I've only just started in the last maybe 3 months to really explore this, and I think there's so much globally we don't know, and that excites me.
I know, me too. I'm so thankful to be alive right now. So Ella, let's look at the meaning behind this triangle. And of course, it could be interpreted so many different ways, and everyone's is unique. It's a bit like a thumbprint. But basically, it speaks to your inner world and your outer world. So let's look at the inner world. So let's say that each of these is a form of yearning of the soul. It's something that your soul actually yearns for, and it's speaking to you through words. And we know words are limited, but they're what we've got. And they can serve a purpose. So essentially, the law of the triangle is that what is at the base creates what is at the top. So two things that are very precious to you, when you bring both of those into your life, that's the formula for creating the thing that you really want, that's most precious. Let's say your highest value, that's what transcendence is. So there's a sense of journey to this too. It's linear. So if you imagine that your first focus is to create community, And then after that, it's self-expression. So community, what I heard that according to your interpretation was people that, you know, you get on with, like-minded souls. Some of them can be quite a bit older than you, but the overarching feeling of that is a feeling of safety, that there's safety in this, in being together in this community that you're creating. And that then from that position of safety, you're okay to self-express. Does that make sense? That from there you can pull the stopper out of the bottle, and however that shows up, whether it's on a dance floor or, you know, articulating, speaking like you are here, you're in this safe container, so you can fully express, and there is going to be no negative consequence to that. And so from this position of self-expression, let's say that's the ultimate physical manifestation of who you are, you know, your soul, that's when you can start to transcend and glide beautifully into the greater unknown and be a part of that. Does that make sense?
Perfect, perfectly illustrated. What came up for me when you were saying it is, I'm like, yeah, I need an audience to self-express to. That's what you know, I need some feedback. I need to, even though it's not, you know, I'm not, I think there's a part of me that's afraid of the negative feedback, but yeah, my community is the base for me to do my work.
Yeah, exactly.
For me to show up and do that. Absolutely. That's perfect.
Yeah. And so that's satisfying the inner need. And then as you do that, these things that we call needs really become values. You know, they become who you are, what you stand for. So in other words, you're now fully living them. And when you do that, it's like a point where you start to get out of your own way. And they're still just as important, but now they're how you live your life. And so, and now the direction is more outwards. You know, this is how you impact the world. And what's interesting is that there's a correlation between these three things and your why, your what, and your how. So if we go in reverse order and go to the top of the triangle now, and we look at transcendence, that really speaks to the why. That really is your, you know, your purpose, why you are here, what gets you out of bed, that feeling, you know, that bliss that you described of being part of something very, very much bigger. But it's also potentially your gift to others as well, to help them experience the same thing. And you mentioned that your clients have in common that they're essentially teachers and facilitators, aren't they? So they're in the wellness industry, wellness and transformation. So they're essentially in the contribution space already. So that suggests to me that what you're doing is helping them become even bigger in that space, you know, bigger than something that's bigger than themselves. But there's limitless possibility in that arena. So the person who transforms others becomes transformed themselves. That's like the why. And you might never mention that in marketing material, but that's what you know, it gets you out of bed. That's your inner knowing. But what you do put in your marketing material is the what, and that's self-expression. And so you are giving people permission to self-express. That's what you're already getting thank yous on that, around that. So helping, you know, these beautiful people who are here to genuinely make others better, to ease their suffering in whatever way, are able through your work to express themselves, who they are, and, you know, what they do in a way that's very, very genuine and non-self-critical. And then how you do this, the how is through your community. So it's really the greatest work is done through the community. And in turn, you're helping teach them how to communicate with their community. So it's like this endless ripple effect.
It's perfect, Janet. I mean, this is just gorgeous, the way that this is all rolling out. It's so true. It's absolutely true.
Yeah. So it's funny. It is quite, it is uncanny how it works. But that's the power of the triangle, that it's in a very intentional shape, unless it's the shadow triangle, which points the other way. We won't go into that in this call, but this one, the intentional triangle, is very focused, but it's coming from a solid base. That's the strength behind it. So you've got these two very strong needs. So if you focus, you know, particularly on community, that's the one that's calling to you first, to really focus on building that. Creating that very solid, safe foundation that in turn is going to lead to the rest. And what tends to happen at that point is that one feeds the other. So it almost becomes circular, and there's movement around it. So as you transcend, your community builds more self-expression. So it starts to expand outwards and outwards. So a bit like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Merkaba, the way that spins around to white light, the same thing here, that your journey takes the same form. So it's ever expansive. So there you have it. Now, before we finish, how is that for you, by the way, that interpretation? Is that helpful, Ella?
Very helpful. It's actually it's really sparked a few things for me, for sure. And it's actually interesting because I'm looking to make some decisions around spending some time in a few different countries, moving forward. And I feel really called back to Mallorca. And, the one thing that really does seem to make a difference as a foundation is who I have around me and who I have access to. And I just only recently realized this, and I know it fundamentally, the average of people you spend the most time with, blah, blah, blah. But like hearing you say that back to me of just like that community for self-expression allows me to transcend. That's really true. Like that really rings true for me. And it's great because you've just helped to sort of give me a bit of a guiding light for making decisions, around that, because I think that community, and I know it, whenever I go, I'm like, oh, I've got to go to I was like, first thing I think is like, I need to make some friends. It's the first thing I think is like, I need to bring that community around me. I need to give myself that space that's going to be safe, fun, exciting, and where I can self-express. But I think the way that you just described it to me is really, really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad, because what's very important, we see it here in Bali. People can get into the space of service almost from a position of having savior syndrome.
We see it a lot here, Jen.
Yeah, we do, and it's to prove to others something about themselves, and of course that never works. And people sense that energetically too. They go, I don't know if you're really here for me or if you're for yourself. But what's important about this is that it's actually saying, look after yourself first, put yourself first. That's not being egoic, right? That's saying there are needs that you have. There's a wound there that you need to heal. This is part of your heroine's journey. And in so doing, that's how you will be of service to others. There's a sense of journey in this. It's putting the self first in an act of, if you like, divine selfishness is how you genuinely help others. And just note to self, this is an important message for all of us in the healing space.
Absolutely.
That we don't get into the martyrdom, self-sacrifice space, because I can definitely speak on that. All right. Final words, Ella. Before I push pause on record, I just want you to imagine that your ideal client is out there. Someone who is a great teacher. They've got a great program. They do great work. Might be a facilitator, but the job of filling whether it's a retreat or a Zoom room, is something they really struggle with, and honestly something that they just don't like. They go, I just want to do what I love doing. What do I do? Because I'm almost at a point now where I'm not making the income I need to make to justify all the work I'm putting out. So what do I do? What would you say to that person, Ella?
It's funny, as you said, like, imagine your ideal client. I looked over to the left here and I have a little plaque that I picked up in Mallorca that says Magic Woman on it. I was like, yes, that is my ideal client. So your question was, what should they do?
Yeah, what would you say to them? A lot of people kind of reach the brink of their work and go, should I go back to my 9-to-5 job? At least I had, solid income.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think the first thing that I do always say is it's exactly what you've described in this conversation with me. It's like the obstacle is the way. If you're experiencing resistance and challenge, let's go. Because whatever is coming up for you here, the things that you believe, and these are the things that are keeping you stuck and keeping you where you're at, playing small, not earning what you want to. These are all opportunities to resolve stuff within yourself. And as you resolve these issues and resolve these wounds and transmute them, they will become part of your service, part of your, it's like that thing, your message. And those that are courageous enough to do it, always, I have not seen an example of where if you don't go at these things, you don't come out the other side, you know? And I think having seen that for so many people, again, is one of the things that kept me going through my own journey. And it's difficult because you don't always believe in yourself. So allow other people to believe in you. You know, it's one of the things I love to do when I have calls with people. And, you know, it was one of the things that just helped me when I was down and out. You know, you saw something in me, Scott saw something in me, Aaron saw something in me. There's belief in others, and it's okay to need other people sometimes, you know, when you can't. I call it like borrowed courage, right? Like borrowed belief. It's like that thing of just allowing somebody to help you cross that threshold of to get to a place where you will be able to give that to yourself. And I think that as long as you're prepared to go at it until it works, like that's who victory belongs to. You know, there's the only time things don't work is if you give up. So if you're feeling, and if you feel the call, if you feel that call for service, and you want to contribute, and you want to live a life, like if you have that drive, that's the one thing I look for when I have calls with people, right, Jen? It's like they've got to have, because I describe like what we do is that we're like the guide rails on the bowling alley. Like we'll keep you on track, you know, like pop the rails up. Those are the pins you're heading, but the ball is it's going. You know,
that's right.
It just needs. So you need to be the bowling ball. Like if you're ready to let that fire inside of you like actually fuel something in the right direction, then just fucking go for it. Like ultimately it was the same thing conversation I had with myself when I chose to leave my fiance, and everything that I had behind, I was like, fuck it, why not? Like I only get one go round here in this body, in this life, with these things, with this cool hair. Like let's give it everything we've got. And I think that when I lost my dad, the same thing happened for me then. You know, I was like, wow, life actually is short. And like, some people might not like some stuff, and you might have to deal with some uncomfort, but like, there's so many reasons it won't work. It might not work out, but what if it does? Like, what if it
That's
does
right.
work out?
Yeah. What if you die never knowing? Yeah, exactly.
Like it's my favorite phrase, so I have two things that like little lame quotes that I love, like cheesy cliche quotes. The first thing is be fearless in pursuit of what sets your soul on fire. That is my number one thing, that it's in the middle of my vision board, and I remind myself of it every day. And then the second one, which is one of our community values, which is progress over perfection, is like better an oops than a what if.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's
my
great.
favorite.
I like that.
It's like you've got to fail fast, get in the arena, get yourself bloody, mess yourself up. Like you will develop just the most beautiful character. You will become the most incredible, like rich, diverse version of yourself. Richard Branson says it. He's like, I don't want to get to the finish line, you know, neatly, impeccably dressed, in order, everything in place. He's like, I want to screech in, sliding in on one leg, covered in dirt, rough and ready, and been like, what a ride. Those are my parting words.
I love that. Ella Cook, thank you so much.
Thank you, Janet.
I've really enjoyed being on the roller coaster with you.
And I just want to say thank you as well, because you have been a huge part of this journey for me. Thank you for everything you've done to support me and continue to encourage me to self-express. You are one of those people that I hold really dear in my community. And thank you for the work that you do for others. I've seen the impact that it's had on my life. And so just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing in the world as well.
Thank you, Ella.
You have just listened to another enlightening episode of Wake the F Up with Janet Hogan. To find out more about the breakthrough, guided way to get off the hamster wheel and seize a life of freedom and fulfillment, visit janethogan.com/podcast for access to the show notes and to learn more about Janet's breakthrough work. Just remember, finding your true path isn't potluck, it's a process. Until next time.